Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Today we actually have a very exciting episode. As you can see, all three of us are doing our first in-person podcast together. So joining me is my two older brothers. We got Andy over here, lead game dev, and Eric, assistant to the lead game dev. Is that right?
I believe it's assistant lead dev.
And that's why you have an assistant regional manager.
Yes, it is. Assistant to the regional manager.
Same thing.
No, it's not. It's lower. So
It's close.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll talk about that later. In our first podcast where I sat down with Andy, our lead game dev, we primarily talked about what are some of the things that we did to set up the playtesting environment in terms of creating the Discord channel, getting the invites out, introducing everyone to our demo version. So for today, we thought it'd be beneficial to maybe talk about phase two after that, what it's looked like to execute and implement on some of the things that we learned from the playtesting phase. And Eric, you were recently talking about a certain frame of reference of how we look at the feedback, the decisions that we make. Maybe elaborate on what you were thinking there?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a really empathetic playtesters that have done a really fantastic job taking their time to playtest our game. Really appreciate them. But I would, maybe forewarn indie game devs, this is the first time we're going through this process. It can be overwhelming, the amount of feedback that you get. And even the most empathetic playtesters are going to give feedback in a way saying, okay, I would make this choice, or I would choose to implement this mechanic differently. The natural reaction, at least for us that are building a game for the first time, can be one of, okay, let's just respond to this feedback exactly how it's given. In other words, if a player says, I don't understand the use of the turret mechanics, the opening level, I think you should potentially rework that or scrap that. Just instead of knee-jerk reacting to that, we want to try to ask questions in terms of, do we scrap the mechanic, or are we not implementing the mechanic in a way that we intend our players, how we intend our players to interact with that mechanic? So it's just something to take a little time to think about. So another thing that helps us when we were trying to figure out how to process feedback, we actually stole this tip from one of our favorite game development inspirations, Thomas Brush. And he talked about this analogy of how when you're a doctor and a patient describes to you symptoms, you may do exactly what the patient tells you to do, but you may actually do something else. So it's kind of like this buffer where your players are presenting feedback. You almost look at those things as symptoms. And then you, as the actual builders of the game, you might know, oh, there's actually this other system in the game that supports that, but the players miss that, It's not really our job to say, well, why didn't you find that system? More of our job to kind of say, well, our patient's presenting with this symptom, but we have a cure in the game, but maybe we didn't do a good enough job of presenting it, or we didn't guide the player towards it as well as we could have. So rather than doing an instant reaction and doing everything that your playtesters say, there could be other things in your game that you have that you just kind of need to bring up to the surface. That's just something that we learned from Thomas Brush that I think is a pretty useful way of framing feedback.
Andy, that's a really good point. There are a few examples that came up during our playtesting where I think players were a bit confused as to different things that were happening within the game. And one in particular was when it's dusk and you're repairing your turrets or buying souls. Right now we have a visual shader that comes up through the bottom of the screen. And some players saw that subtle cue and knew that was going to be the dawn phase. But for a lot of our players, they were really confused as to when there's going to be the next dawn phase, like when do they need to prepare and have everything ready to go for the vampires. One of the feedback points was having a really flashy visual with a literal countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, dawn phase entered. And so we took that as more so a symptom of the players being confused. Instead, I wanted to marry the subtlety that Andy provided with the visual, the shader turning white as the sun rose. And I wanted to have the same level of subtleness with my audio cue. So in my previous video, I walked through that, how I made that step by step. That was just an example of taking that feedback and maybe going back to the root cause that might be causing that. I think the audio and the visual turned out fantastic. And I think it's just a nice data point to have in terms of our decision-making process. Come back to the team analyze that, strategize on how we want to implement that, and really cue in the player on the timing of the game without breaking that immersion. Another thing that came up within the playtesting was players confused as to when they need to advance within the map and open up the door. So Eric, you had some interesting insight into that. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, and I think we noticed when we were watching some of our playtesters, they were, some of them, the idea is that you can hold out against the vampires in the first room for a certain amount of waves, but the number of enemies are going to increase. You need to kind of get access to these upgrades. And how do you get those upgrades? Well, you have to advance further. And players were just unsure. They would stay in the first room. Now, you can look at that and realize that we're making the game. We know the rest of this map is here and we know those upgrades are there. But a player for the first time, we didn't give any hint to that. We had to look at, how do we incentivize our players to go explore the rest of the map? So originally in the game, opening up a door was actually pretty expensive. I think it was 10 doubloons. So that was us thinking, well, there's really valuable things behind these doors, right? Like going through the doors is how you get to the power-ups in the game. So thinking about it from that lens, it was like, oh, it should cost something. But what we realized is it was actually kind of prohibiting players from opening doors. It's like, well, if it's 10 doubloons and I don't even know what's behind that door, I would just rather buy a turret instead. I know what that does. It kills vampires. One of our playtesters made a suggestion like, well, hey, what if you guys just made the doors free? And at first I was like, but we tried it and it was amazing, because as soon as we just made the doors free, all of a sudden players were going through doors a lot more often. They were exploring and they were able to kind of realize, oh, hey, it's actually no risk to me to open a door. It doesn't cost me money. And that really encouraged players to explore and push forward more. And we saw players getting a lot more attempts on the boss simply because of the fact that there was no longer this barrier. That's kind of one of those things where you go in thinking, well, I'm gonna, put an expensive price on this thing because I know that this part of the game is a valuable place for the player to reach to. But you can sometimes have to rethink that in terms of, well, but if that's the part of the game that I want to funnel the players to, you have to think about how you can do that.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap up there because we smell some very delicious, fresh chocolate chip cookies that my wife is making in the kitchen right now. Before we do, we hope those 2 insights were valuable for any folks or teams out there that are starting to brainstorm how they want to tackle their playtesting and how they can ultimately get the maximum benefit out of that time. Before we leave, we thought we would tee up a little bit in terms of what's next for Dracs After Dusk. The biggest focus area for our team right now is really building out our Steam page. So getting the gameplay screenshots and trailer on there, the art capsules, the descriptions and tags. That way we can really start to push for those wish lists. Originally, we were targeting that June Steam Next Fest for the demo launch. That's looking like it's going to be pushed for the October one instead. And the reasoning behind that primarily comes from Thomas Brush and Chris Zukowski's take, who is a well-known indie game marketing consultant and strategist within the industry. The thought being, if you really want to maximize the most out of your Steam Next Fest opportunity and gather as much potential wish lists as possible, you don't want to enter that event with 0 wish lists, or else the Steam algorithm will not be in your favor and your game is more likely to get buried. You want to go into that Steam Next Fest event with some amount of wish list, some amount of brand momentum that you built up to that point, and use the next Fest event to continue to funnel and build on that momentum. So stay tuned for those updates on the trailer and Steam page coming shortly. Guys, thanks so much for stopping by. Good to do this in person for the first time.
Yeah.
And we'll catch you on the next episode. Take care. All right. Nice,
awesome.
guys.
First podcast,
First
all in
podcast.
person. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, we did a great job. We didn't really talk over each other or anything. I feel like it went well.
That was good.
Well, hey, wait a minute. Orders are
Free
free.
to open.
Hot Milk Zero Double. Go ahead and...
Oh, yeah, get in there.
Yeah. Yes.